So develop those skills, get good at something you like to do. So that's my advice. Now, I think there's some questions you have out there. I'd love to have access to your questions and your comments. So I'll get started. Go ahead.
First of all, thank you for coming and talking to us. I was wondering, how often do constitutional principles guide your voting in the House? Namely, have you ever voted against something even though you would have liked to see that passed because you thought it was unconstitutional or something along those lines?
I don't think I've ever been asked that question before. I wouldn't. There's no way I would vote again. There's no way I would vote for something that goes against the Constitution, because it wouldn't make sense for me to do that. First of all, it wouldn't have much chance of passing, and if it did pass, then the courts would throw it out. So it doesn't make sense for me to vote for things that would go against the Constitution. Now, people wonder what makes you decide to vote in a certain way. When I came here, I felt a certain amount of passion about energy technology, and that's an area I feel an expertise on. I'm going to vote on healthcare, which may be something on the back of your mind in that question. Healthcare is something that it needs changing in our country. We pay twice per capita for healthcare for any other country in the entire world, and yet our healthcare outcomes are not as good as they are in many places. So something needs to be changed. Our healthcare system needs to be reformed. The reform that was presented to us is not perfect. It has some issues, but I think in terms of providing health care to Americans at the lowest possible cost, that was the way to go. So I supported that bill, and I think that may be the basis of your question.
Well, I just wanted to know if you had any, I wasn't specifically referencing the health care bill.
Well, no, it doesn't make sense to vote for something that would go against the Constitution, because it would be overturned in courts, and that would just inflame a lot of people. Now, I don't think anyone does that really, but you have a basic set of ethical principles inside of you, and you have your district that has certain needs and requirements, and you have to balance those two. If there's something that the district needs that I'm sort of neutral on ethically, then I'll vote for the district. If there's something the district wants, or certain fraction of the district wants, that I feel is something I'm against, that I won't vote for it. And you have a sort of balance in that way. You can't just ignore the needs of your district, but on the other hand, you have to have ethical principles that you base things on. And the Constitution is part of all of our ethics, really. There's the basis of balancing, balanced government and so on, providing the basic civil rights. Those are things that we all believe in, and that none of us would vote against anyway. Thanks for the question. Yes, ma'am.
So,
Your name?
Grace.
Grace?
So what are exactly are your views, and how did the National Defense Authorization Act really pass? Because I personally think it's kind of unconstitutional, and I know a lot of other people do. So
The National Defense Authorization Act?
At least the part that says that they can just put you in jail without a trial, without telling you why, for an undefined amount of time.
Good.
I personally think that's unconstitutional, and it passed 93-7 in the Senate.
I don't think 93 senators voted for it, but maybe I'm wrong about that. I thought it was more like 87 or something like that. But you're probably right. What the National Defense Authorization Act did was perpetuated existing law. So if you feel that the existing law is unconstitutional, then that's where the problem is. The National Defense Authorization Act did not change existing law with regard to civil rights. So it didn't give the President or the Defense Department or anybody the ability to arrest an American without due cause, without due process. And so there is a certain amount of misinformation about what that act does, but it did not change the existing law. And I don't know if that satisfies your answer or not, but when you have troops fighting for our country overseas. It's very hard to vote against money for that for a lot of different reasons. And I did study the bill, and I did study, and I looked at the arguments on both sides, and I didn't see how that bill would change what the existing practices are at this point in time. So, and personally, I felt justified in voting for that reason. And I think there may be a problem with regard to the Patriot Act, with regard to how the Department of Defense is required to arrest terrorists or suspected terrorists overseas. And that may need to be changed, but the Defense Authorization Act did not affect that practice, is my understanding. Yes?
I was wondering, especially last summer, we saw a lot of the media saying this was the end of civil discourse. Congress is no longer, it's just become bickering. And what's your opinion on the civil discourse right now? Is it really as bad as the media paints it, or how is it right now?
It's very counterproductive, and it's a problem for our country and for the world. And I don't have an answer on how to fix that. Some problems that contribute to that are campaign financing. If you look at what's happening in the Republican primary right now, a lot of independent money is coming into that from very wealthy donors, and they're not. They don't have to disclose who they are. All they have to do is put the money down, and it goes into negative advertising. So they're calling Mr. Romney a liar. They're calling Mr. Gingrich a flip-flopper. I mean, they're going at it in a very personal and nasty way. And what that does is it just sort of closes the shutters. When you're having a discussion with somebody and somebody says, "Well, you're stupid. What do you think?" The shutters close and you don't hear anything else. And that's what's happening in America right now. There's a lot of accusations going on back and forth about who is worse and who is more evil. And it shuts down the discussion, and it makes the discourse more difficult. And in my personal case, you see when you get into a campaign, an election campaign, and this is an election year, so you'll see this. I'm not running in this district next year, but you'll see this no matter who is running. There'll be negative advertising. And the truth is that negative advertising works. And it's most unfortunate, but people listen when you say, "Well, so-and-so's a schmuck, here's the reasons why." People remember that. If you say, "Well, so-and-so's a good guy," they don't pay attention. So one of the things we can do is reduce the amount of money that's spent in election campaigns. That would be a big step toward ending that problem. But yes, in Congress, you just hear that back and forth, and it's very counterproductive, and it's very disturbing. Personally, I've been judged as one of the most what's the right word, Sherry? I've been one of the most independent members of Congress. I don't vote so much for one party or the other. I don't go on the floor and bash people because I don't think it's very productive. But it's a problem for our country. Fixing up campaign financing might be one way to improve that. There's another situation in this country right now where a very wealthy foreign person came into this country, bought up a bunch of media, and is getting out a bias in our media that turns a lot of people off to one side or the other. I don't want to name what that is, but you might be able to figure it out. So there's a lot of money that's driving this, and I think that's part of the problem. Yes?
This past spring and summer, we've seen a lot of intervention from the U.S. in Libya and other countries out there. And I know the whole War Powers Resolution was, and President Obama's use of force in nations like Libya was somewhat controversial because he didn't go to the entire Congress after that 60-day period, I believe. A couple questions. What is your opinion? Do you think would you have voted to give President Obama authorization to keep going with his actions in Libya? And if not, or if you know anybody that maybe wouldn't have, is there any like sort of remedy? Do you know anybody that might consider cutting off military funding or something like that to prevent something like this from happening?
That's a really good question, because sending troops, sending men and women into war is the most grave and most important function the government has. So taking that decision lightly is a huge mistake. Now, in the case of Libya, there's a good arguments that the United States has a role to play in that, but there's also good arguments to say that this is really a Libyan internal issue that we shouldn't be involved in. Going back in history a little ways, Libya had been involved in developing of weapons of mass destruction and terrorist actions. And after the invasion of Iraq, Colonel Gaddafi, the then leader of Libya, backed off from his path of terrorism and weapons of mass destruction because he feared our involvement, our intervention in his country.